If you really want to understand why tuition is getting so expensive in Canada, look no further than the baby boomers. Seriously. This is Q&A, but Canadian. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Cheyenne, and if you're new here, I make social and political commentary videos. And today's question is, why is tuition so expensive? The reason why I bring up baby boomers is because there's a direct correlation between what the government spends money on and the life stages of the baby boomer generation. When baby boomers were going to school for the first time, the government spent more money on building a lot of elementary schools and hiring teachers. When they went to university, the government spent money on universities. Most of the universities in Canada are public, which means they're funded by our government. When you look at the history of government funding in Canada to universities, you can see that in the late 60s, there was like a bit of a peak, and then it sort of went down in the 70s, and then back up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then back down again after the 2008 financial crisis. Most of the stats I could find for government funding started in the 60s and 70s. Like that's when they started tracking government funding because baby boomers were going to universities. Baby boomers are from 1946 to 1964. So if you map that onto government funding for universities, the peak in 1965, the first baby boomer would have been 19 years old. So then in the 1990s, when they like sort of tapered off and stopped funding universities, the last baby boomer would have been 26 years old. During the 1970s, Canadian governments were funding 75% of a university's operating budget. Today, they cover a little over 50%. This funding of 75%, it didn't last all the way through until 1990. It sort of tapered off a little bit, but it didn't drop below 60% until the 1990s. Quick math lesson. In 1990, the minimum wage in Canada was $5 an hour. Tuition on average in Canada was $1,464. Theoretically, in the 1990s, you only needed to work 293 hours at minimum wage to make enough money to pay for your tuition that fall. That's around 7 weeks at 40 hours a week, making $5 an hour. So like half your summer. So that means that any baby boomer could work minimum wage for the whole summer and make enough money and then some for their tuition in the fall. Must be nice. So in the 1990s, the government slashed fundings for universities and immediately tuition rose. So now we're like mid-1990s, early 2000s, the first baby boomers are like 45, 50, 55 years old. And their kids are like university age. And now they're hearing their kids talk about high tuition costs. And in their heads, they're like, wait, why can't my kid work a minimum wage job and pay for tuition like I was able to? So now baby boomers are concerned about tuition getting expensive because they know the importance of going to university because they went to university. And now they want their kids to go to university, but they're realizing that it's way more expensive than what they remember. And so this is like preventing them from being able to finish school. Once politicians realized that baby boomers were concerned about why tuition was getting so expensive, you start to see these government programs to help with the high cost of tuition. So in the late 1990s, the government came up with the RESP, Registered Education Savings Plan. These were tax-free savings accounts. So if the parents put money into this account, it wouldn't be taxed from their income, and the government would match to a certain amount to help the money grow so that by the time the child is ready to go to university, they have a substantial amount of money to help them do that. It's very important to note that this did not fix the high cost of tuition. This was a program for baby boomers to make them feel better about their kids going to university. This doesn't help the kids who are actually going to university. In the late 1990s, the first set of baby boomers were having their kids enter university. So there was still that whole generation behind them whose kids were becoming of age to go to university. That's why they invented these programs for baby boomers to save for their kids' schooling. And then in the early 2000s, the government created the National Student Loan Service Center. Again, another program that doesn't address the high cost of tuition, it just makes paying for the tuition easier. So the National Student Loan Service Center is basically the federal government taking money and giving it to provinces to decide how they give it to students. The other thing that the government did was spend a ton of money in upgrading university facilities. The last time the government spent a significant amount of money on universities was in the 70s. So come 2000, those buildings were looking super old. So the government gave the universities a little money, do a little facelift, bring them into the new century. And I have the perfect example for this. So I went to York University in Toronto, and I remember going on campus with my mom before school started, and she was all excited because she also went to York and she wanted to see what the new campus looked like. So we were walking around and she would point out like old buildings that were still there when she was in school back in the 90s. And she would always say like, oh my gosh, they've built so much since then. At York University, we have Very Hall, which is basically like the center of the university that you see in all of their posters, all of their brochures, websites, whatever. Very Hall has very little functional significance. It's literally a massive cylinder. You walk in and it's literally just open space. Like it's just a circle hallway. In the 5 years that I was at that school, I walked through Very Hall literally every single day, but I had one class in that building. I honestly didn't even know there were classrooms in Very Hall until I had that class in my 4th year. When I had that class, it made me realize that York really built Very Hall to cover up the Scott building, which is like, you know, thousands of classrooms, a whole library, super ugly, built in the 70s, but they built Very Hall tall enough to cover Scott from the front entrance of the school. And then they plaster it on all their brochures, all their pamphlets, websites, so the only thing you know about York is Very Hall until you get there and realize there's this massive ugly building behind it. Anyways, university facelift. Okay, so early 2000, government funding brings Canadian universities into the 21st century. Now we have student loans that you can get to help pay for tuition. We have tax-free savings accounts that your parents can have for you when you're ready to go to school. Then the 2008 financial crisis hits and government funding for university is once again slashed. And since then, tuition has been on the rise like nobody's business. In 2018, average tuition across Canada is like $6,500 a year. Remember in 1990 when it was $1,464? Obviously, if you're in commerce, engineering, medicine, this doesn't apply to you. I'm talking about liberal arts here mostly. And this is also an average across Canada. Tuition in Saskatchewan and Manitoba are very different from tuition in Alberta and Ontario. So $6,500, minimum wage back then was $13, only $1 difference now. You would have to work 500 hours to come up with enough money to pay your tuition. 500 hours is 12 weeks at 40 hours a week. Obviously, tuition's more expensive now because tuition goes up by like 3% every single year. Minimum wage has gone up by $1. So in a 4-month period, you need to work 3 full months at 40 hours a week to pay for your tuition, if you're not in business, engineering, or medicine. But that's just tuition. That doesn't include your residence or your meal plan, so stay at home. If you're staying at home, you better walk to school because that doesn't include transportation. Once you get to school, don't buy any textbooks because that doesn't include textbooks or lab fees. And also, when you get to school, don't network, don't have fun, don't join clubs because you don't have money to be buying food and alcohol. So basically, in your 4 months off a year, you need to go find a job that'll pay you minimum wage and give you 40 hours a week for 3 months to just sit in class. If you do find a minimum wage job that'll give you 40 hours a week, that 1 extra month, you better not use that money to like, I don't know, drive your car to work and pay insurance and gas because you need that for school too. And you better pack a lunch for work. Like don't even think about buying a lunch. What is that? And if you have a birthday in the summer, just don't celebrate it. Don't have friends with birthdays in the summer. You need the money for school. If you only find a part-time job that pays you minimum wage for the whole summer, I'm sorry, but you're not gonna make it. So this is all very simple. When governments fund university, tuition is cheap. When governments don't fund university, tuition is expensive. But don't get mad at Justin Trudeau, because university is a provincial jurisdiction. Only provinces decide how much money gets spent on universities in their provinces. So how it works is the federal government will give money to each provinces for universities, but the provinces decide whether that money for universities is spent on giving universities a facelift, or lowering tuition, or giving out scholarships. So really, you should be looking at the premier of your province. Doug Ford, Jason Kenney, John Horgan. So when people do ask premiers why is tuition so expensive, they always say they don't have the money for schools. But that's not really what it's about. The real reason why tuition is so expensive is because university students don't vote. You know who does vote? Baby boomers. And you know what baby boomers need right now? Healthcare. So realistically ask yourself, if you're a politician and you need votes, why would you spend money on university when you know that at the end of the day, these students are not going to come out and vote for you? But if you spend money on healthcare, all these baby boomers who vote consistently will think to themselves, wow, you remember that time my premier spent money on healthcare? Like, I really need him in office to continue that spending. That is literally what it comes down to. And I know this is true because in Quebec, university costs on average $3,500. And the reason why is because Quebec students love a good protest. Like if you just Google Quebec student protests, like which one? There was multiple in every single decade since the 60s. Right now, Quebec students filed a class action lawsuit to sue their universities to give them the money back from their last year's tuition. But when I look at other provinces, all I see is change.org petitions. Oh, sign my petition to petition my school not to raise tuition during COVID. Guys, a whole lawsuit. They filed a whole lawsuit. Every other student in every other province needs to get on Quebec's level. If students actually voted en masse, their issues would matter. But they don't vote en masse, so nobody cares. This is just part 1. So in part 2, I list a whole other set of reasons for why tuition is getting so expensive. And just a heads up, it's actually so stupid. And I also wanted to mention that this video is a part of a series where I'm sort of going through everything that my parents told me would happen once I get a degree that isn't really panning out anymore. So right now I'm going through getting a degree in student debt, but I'm definitely gonna go in depth about like the job market, home ownership, and all the things that we were told would happen to us that isn't really panning out. So make sure you subscribe to get that notification for my next video. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and let me know in the comment section below if you actually agree that students voting more would have an effect on tuition. So thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.